Elements with one of our resellers here, Kaufman Media. So thank you very much for joining us. We actually have Jason on the line with us, or on the line, I guess is how you would call it, to walk through a bit of an example of one of the use cases done with Signagelive. And today we're going to be digging into that in a little bit of detail, just to understand where some of the benefits of Signagelive come in. We'll talk to Jason more specifically around how Kaufman have come to the table and brought in the additional features around Signagelive that you need to obviously deliver a full solution. Hopefully this should give you a really interesting concept and look into what the full gamut of releasing digital signage out to your deployment would look like. So we'll talk about Signagelive in some detail, and we'll talk about Kaufman Media in some detail, and then we'll look at the case study and kind of go through that together. So before we do go over there, I'm going to bring Jason onto the line here. Should hopefully be able to hear his voice now. Jason, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Tim.
And I think, if I'm looking at this correctly, oh, yeah, hold on a moment. Good. Yes. Okay. They can hear you and I can hear you, and everything seems to be working as expected. So, Jason, thanks very much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tim.
So, for those that aren't aware of Kaufman Media, do you want to kind of give us a bit of an overview as to who Kaufman Media are to start with, and just kind of introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So, Kaufman Media is a digital signage integration firm based in Columbus, Ohio, in the United States. But we've been fortunate enough to service clients across the globe utilizing Signagelive over the last 10 years. So, we go to market with Signagelive across whether it's retail, education, healthcare, corporate communication, manufacturing. Really, any of our digital signage installations, Signagelive is at the backbone of that.
Perfect. Absolutely. And from a Signage Live perspective, obviously you and I, we've worked together for as long as I've been with Signage Live. So we know that there's a lot of work that happens with Kaufman Media, and you're fairly CMS centric and kind of digital signage centric as a whole, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd say 98% of what we do is digital signage centered.
Cool. Perfect. So what we've kind of invited you on today to talk about is this case study, and just specifically, we're going to keep this fairly general in terms of who the client is specifically, obviously for security purposes. But we're going to talk about some of the challenges, some of the ways that we overcome that challenge, whether that be CMS focused around what Signagelive deliver, or whether it be something else in terms of hardware issues or anything along those lines, because it's pretty imperative to realize that when it comes to digital signage, Signagelive, the CMS, are the hub of elements that you'll then need to pull in. So whether it be hardware, content, delivery, all of those things, it's going to need to be brought in mind. And that's why having Jason on here today is going to be really beneficial, because it kind of takes the whole solution and delivers it, and we can talk about that in some more detail. So, Jason, you've put together a kind of a brief slide deck that we're going to go through in terms of what Signagelive focuses on when it comes to assisting, and what yourselves kind of add in when it comes to hardware and solutions like that. So, did you want to kind of get kicked off there in terms of where we start with this particular use case and where they started off, I guess?
Yeah, 100%. So I'll do a little introduction again, keeping it general for security purpose. But this is one of the largest family-owned landscape and irrigation product supply companies in the United States. They have over 200 retail locations, and this is pretty much a retail digital signage application where you walk into the facility and they have a screen, talking to the patrons about what's going on. And so kind of the challenge that they had is they implemented 196 Samsung system on chip displays in 2015. And they began delivering content by shipping a plethora of USBs across the fleet. And that already 196 devices, shipping out via mail, FedEx, whatever, that does sound a little bit intensive, but they would just rotate those because they do a monthly content change. And so 400 USBs in the entire cycle. So some of the things they noticed really quickly and early on is, one, time consuming, just the labor of the human element, making the content ready, putting it onto the USB drives, shipping it out. It really just became a constraint on time, and then just costly as well. Buying the USBs, some of them get lost, corrupt, and just the shipping logistics of that. Content not making it to the displays. The retail person forgets to plug it in halfway through the month, or just the content never gets turned on because a lot of times live TV or cable TV would be playing. You're not able to track real-time analytics. So there was really not a way for them to kind of get a further ROI onto the digital signage network. and then no screen control. They couldn't, control what is happening on the displays at any given moment.
And when you're talking about those 400 USBs, that's because they would have obviously had to have a USB on site whilst the other ones are being shipped back. So it's double the hardware in essence to deliver that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously from a standpoint of functionality, then when we're talking about where they were previously with USBs, the content management is fairly limited in terms of we're just delivering a singular image or multiple images. How did that current run previously?
Yeah, absolutely. So they would have a string of images, probably in the neighborhood of 19 to 25 images on the slideshow, but it was
Mm.
full screen. And then they were just kind of landlocked into that playlist until the next month. So there was not that capability of doing anything on the fly or ad hoc.
And from obviously from one of the things that we're aware of in terms of digital signage and CMS is human error is a factor, and there can be issues where someone makes a mistake, misses a slide, spelling error, whatever it might be. That's a month-long turnaround to then fix that issue if it's over the entire network.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So
And then
obviously, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, so if you wanted to go through to the opportunity slide and then go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, what we're looking at here is obviously a pretty old process of getting digital signage up and running. It worked obviously to an extent, but to turn this into something that's smarter, more cost effective, I won't kind of preempt the slide too much, but we'll move on to the next section. So do you want to kind of go over this next slide?
Yeah, so the opportunity is the client approached Samsung because that's where they purchased the system on chip displays from. And they said, look, we need to know, how we can scale this thing. Here are the issues at hand, which, we just talked about. Who do you recommend as a CMS partner? Thus, Samsung, tapped Signagelive on the shoulder. And then we were, soon brought into the fold to help integrate it, as the partner of Signagelive into the ecosystem of this client and the requirements that they had really set up, because then that's when they started thinking about the requirements and what did they want this to be, as it grew into a more enterprise function. Was it had to be easy to install because these displays were already installed into the physical locations. So they had to have an on-site person be able to walk through an easy setup. They wanted to have user permissions from the software level so they could start delegating, having screen control so they could turn the screens on or off, and they didn't have to worry about the individual location employees turning the screen on or off each day. Proof of play so they can get into an advertising-based scenario with some of their vendors. Being able to do tagging because they do have so many locations. They wanted to be able to group them into their regionalized territories to kind of match their sales plan. Time reduction, just bringing down the cost of time from the USB side of everything. And then the ability to handle tiered content updates because everything from their network infrastructure backhauled to their headquarter location in the Southwest US.
And there's some interesting points you kind of touched on as going through that, because there's quite a few different pieces that this particular use case is using to deliver their full solution, especially if we look back from, simple images on a USB. The first one being that user capability, or the ability to start sectioning out different parts of the network dependent on what user level. So they have, do you know roughly the numbers in how many different users are managing the content across that platform?
Right now, they have about 5 users on any given time in the content team.
So in the way that Signagelive works, and just from kind of depth in terms of the CMS, is there is no limitation in how many users you can have, or no additional cost to adding in those users. But within the platform, you can start sectioning out different playlists to give those users access. So if you have, I've seen, I think the biggest case study was 60 or 70 individual users managing a range of devices. You can get it down to the level of having one user per screen if you wanted to go that deep. So it's just about making it as kind of tailored to their experience as possible.
Absolutely.
The other one you mentioned there with Jason was tagging, which I've never actually kind of discussed on this stream specifically. So do you want to kind of give us a brief overview on the tagging, and maybe not specifically on this use case, but where that becomes powerful when it comes to delivering the content to screen?
Sure, absolutely. So, even in this particular scenario, they have 196 locations, but they have different regions. And then, you're able to maybe use one solid playlist, one master playlist, but then use tagging that matches different players. So then the right assets are going to the right players, again, just to allow ease of control. And you don't have a plethora of playlists that you're trying to manage at any given time across a large fleet. So tagging really becomes a time saver and the workflow sequence to get the content out very easily.
Yep, no, 100%. And I think that's kind of a crucial piece within managing content in the smartest way possible. You could, no reason you couldn't have 200 players and 200 playlists. One's dedicated to each one of them. Someone's manually going into each one of them one by one to make changes. But obviously, if there is any way that you can condense that down to say there's 5 playlists that cover those 200 retail locations, but if we want to make an exception to 1 or 2 locations based on those tags, we can start filtering between those if we need to.
That's right. And they use it in a way that's, from the corporate down, they kind of have, some master HQ based content, but then, some regionalized or even store specific autonomous content talking about maybe barbecue for their local contractors and clients coming in. That's not going to be relevant across the whole fleet. So they'll use tagging to make sure they're able to deliver the content from that one big playlist out to the appropriate screens.
Yep. No, absolutely. Well, that's great. There's another one that I think we'll come back to a little bit later. I want to talk to you about, which is proof of play. But do you want to carry on with going through this process, and we'll touch on those a little bit later?
Absolutely. So if we go to the outcome slide.
Oh, sorry. There's a challenges slide that you've got here. Did you want the outcome slide?
Oh, yes.
There we go. Okay, we've got outcome slide in front of us there.
Excellent. So, walking through some of those requirements that we just talked about, really we had kind of our hit list, if you will, to walk through what we needed to fix for them or help them uncover and set in place. And so in early 2016, we began that rollout of helping them install Signage Live across their fleet of 196 locations. It took about a month and a half just because we're dealing with a retail location. People get busy, and sometimes there was connectivity issues or things that we just had to overcome logistically.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a little bit of time to roll out. But since then, so a little over 4 years now, and they just renewed through 2021. So they believe in Signage Live, and it's been working extremely well. We've been able to walk through with them how to process content for the rollout, because how they were doing it and just putting on a USB isn't necessarily the same thing to make the content appropriate for the playback in a true digital signage scenario for Signage Live. So helping them optimize their codecs, the actual file compression sizes, things of that nature, walking them through that whole program, within the Adobe suites for their content.
Mm-hmm.
The process for content readiness, so walking through the tagging and how to do all of the implementation around that. Setting up the user permissions, again, with 5 users, that was relatively easy,
Mm-hmm.
but still, setting those standards so then they could scale it if employees ever come and go, as we all know that they do. Setting screen controls were across 3 different time zones, so making sure the right screens had the right screen controls for the on-off functionality within
Mm-hmm.
Signage Live. Setting up the proof of play, so they were able to pick and choose their assets they wanted to track on a proof of play level, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more in depth here in a moment.
Mm.
And then lastly, the outcome of that was really a 65% reduction in time from the employee base. So now they didn't have 400 USBs they were trying to manage, checking in with each individual store to make sure that they plugged it in and the content was playing. They could have all of that real time in the Signage Live dashboard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's really key in terms of it's a really interesting list to look at, because in the conversations that we have with anyone that's interested in digital signage for the first time, you kind of take it from the first step in terms of who's managing your content, because it's an important question. And then the kind of follow-ons from that is, how would you like to manage your content in the largest possible form? Because there are some times where someone might say, well, actually, we just have the one piece of content. We want it to roll out unanimously, which is by far the easiest setup. But, as you start to get into these use cases with individual pieces of content or different requirements dependent on location, or, if we're talking about retail environments, what's on offer, what's in stock, all of these questions can come up, and whether that's relevant to the digital signage or not is understanding that process. And that's obviously kind of a value add that you guys bring to the table.
Absolutely. And one of the other elements that we always try to think about is, from the network perspective of the client, are there any sort of nuances or things that we have to understand how they're set up that could impede or impact the digital signage rollout? And one of the biggest drivers was their network backhauled to their headquarters in Southwest United States. So we couldn't just hit send on a gig playlist to 196 locations. It would just crash their point of sale system
Mm.
and stop productivity. So we, again, took tagging a little bit further and tagged the players into regionalized groups. So we also do a staged rollout based upon time zone.
Mm-hmm.
When does the actual playlist get pushed out for those different regions?
Yeah, it's a really interesting use case, and going back to this kind of highlights list that you have here, it's a point question. If you're looking at digital signage for the first time, you're watching this video, it's a clear kind of step by step of what you'll need to think about before even kind of getting in touch and starting to have that discussion. It's who's going to be managing that content, how many users are there, what does your content rollout look like, and what's going to be, kind of core to your digital signage construction. If you come to the table with those questions, we'll be able to help you really, from start to finish in terms of implementation, what may be best for you to be aware of. We've had a lot of conversations. People want proof of play, but don't necessarily know what proof of play is in its concept. Did you kind of want to talk about proof of play in a little bit more detail in terms of where the benefit was in this particular use case and kind of how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, everyone realizes that digital signage, has a capital expense to it. So how can you maximize the return? And one of the ways that this client was thinking about is, okay, we're in a retail establishment. It's in the stores. We're going to have a captive audience. Now it could be, we have our specials that are on our e-commerce. We have our paper signs, but can we take it a step further with our vendors of the product that we sell through the stores and offer them a chance to be highlighted on these displays?
Mm-hmm.
So, then it's similar to like watching TV where you have an ad pop up. They're able to, track and give those analytics back to the advertiser for obviously the proof of payment for, or the validation of payment for the cost of the ad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really proof of play is able to do on the digital signage network through Signagelive is you're able to track all assets into the proof of play, or select, pick and choose which assets you want to track and on which players. And that's exactly what they're doing. Not all their content needs to be tracked from a proof of play standpoint, so they'll go in and just select the ads from their actual vendors and be able to provide that reporting back on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, whatever the cadence is for the end user, and thus creating that validation data.
100%. And I think it's really interesting because more and more of this comes alongside, especially in retail, is, why not, cover some of the cost of doing digital signage in the first place by using advertiser expenditure to cover that. And with digital signage and proof of play, you can start to really validate, the number of impressions, the number of times an asset has displayed. One of the interesting features in proof of play and in Signagelive specifically is it's very accurate to the delivery of the content on screen. So, one of the questions that often get asked is, well, okay, you say that we've played this for 600 hours over the month, but what's your proof? Proof of play is actually bringing that detail back in terms of if a player was offline for any reason and not delivering that content, it will accurately reflect in the response that you get.
Absolutely.
So that's great, and I think is there a next slide that you want me to go over to? I'm aware on the outcome at the moment.
No, that's kind of the end of the slide, but kind of the next progression for this customer was they had some displays that they wanted to repurpose, and they also had some displays where they've fallen out of warranty and the system on chip board, the main board had kind of gone out, but technically the display in and of itself could work. So being that Signagelive is agnostic across a large range of media players, we were able to bring them a solution where they could get the most out of the life of that particular asset being the display.
Mm-hmm.
And we implemented some idea players as well for kind of a 2.0 solution for their non-SoC displays, or ones that had failed but the display was still working.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we the benefit of being able to have an agnostic approach is there's 100 different use cases out there depending on what hardware is currently being used, what hardware they want to use in the future, and it does vary. And sometimes there are situations where the hardware is so outdated that it's just not going to be a good fit to try and retrofit that. But a lot of the time, there is some way of restoring or retaining some of the hardware that's on site at least.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else in terms of just kind of particular nuances or kind of elements that you had to cover off in terms of installation, delivery, anything that really isn't as because we obviously from a Signagelive perspective we know digital signage, the CMS piece, and you guys really start coming into play everywhere else aside from that. So is there anything you can kind of add in terms of if someone was starting to do retail and looking at digital retail for the first time, what's kind of key to them to be aware of?
Yeah, most definitely. So one of the two things coming to mind really is, the education around the content readiness. So, they were used to just taking some of their TV commercials and putting it on the USB stick and letting it fly, or whatever was, playing on their YouTube channel or their website. And again, just letting it go on the USB and out the door.
Mm.
So really, getting them into a workflow of preparing the content that's, to be ready for digital signage. So it didn't, crash, the network or the screen, or they didn't, have a friction point of saying, well, I pushed, deploy and it's not going. What's
Mm-hmm.
happening?
Yeah.
So really educating through that process, and then secondarily is the support side of everything. There's the Signagelive support, but we have our support desk as well. We're able to very intimately know each client's network. Exactly how their topography is for their setup, what serial numbers are at each site. So it really just makes it seamless when we're able to further that support enhancement when we're helping them, run such a large network.
100%. It's a long-standing relationship, most potentially when looking at something like this in digital signage. It's going to be there for a long time, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone go to digital signage and then decide to go back to USB. I don't think that's ever happened in my entire experience. So there's definitely some major benefits to swapping out to something like this, but it just depends on making sure that you know what you want to achieve before you start going into it. And ourselves at Signage Live or Kaufman Media will be able to assist in terms of having that conversation. But it's more just really understanding your use case. So the more you think about how you want to deliver it, I would always suggest kind of take a look at this video, take a look at some of the already delivered digital signage opportunities that are out there, and then walking that back into your own use case and saying, what pieces of this do I need? Because it's almost certainly not going to be all of it, but understanding what options are out there will really give you some key into understanding that. And this is where kind of we can come in and offer our kind of long-standing experience on how that works.
100%. And I think you're spot on, Tim, is walking through kind of that analysis and looking through exactly what that customer wants. I always say that I could take two competitors in the same space, and each of them are going to have just a slight variance in how they're going to utilize digital signage, because everyone's objective is totally different.
Yeah. And not knowing what's out there can cause a whole amount of frustration in terms of we want to be able to achieve this, but we just don't know how. And sometimes it's just researching and understanding it, or coming to someone that already knows how that can be implemented, because there's not a huge amount of situations out there that can't be achieved through digital signage, whether it be through some kind of unique development or whether it be through what's already out there in the field.
That's right.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you coming on today, Jason. Is there anything else that you wanted to add aside from this use case that we've looked at today?
Nothing that stands to mind. I would just kind of cap with, there's a reason that, they're into their fifth season now with Signage Live. So, and there's a reason why we've chosen it, for the last 10 years as kind of our go-to-market CMS platform. So when you're looking for, a particular, CMS, understanding the features, functions, costs, et cetera, but, just, look at time and market and, the clients that they're serving.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Jason. Well, if you want to get in touch with Kaufman Media at all, I'll put on your end slide deck that. Jason, do you want to do a quick kind of overview of yourself and any way they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So anywhere on the social channels at Kaufman Media, sales@kaufmanmedia.com is probably the easiest way to reach out to the team as well. And then I can be found, on LinkedIn, just Jason Alt. So, however, we'll even take smoke signals. So however someone can get in contact with us, we're happy to, have a discussion.
That's great. Well, Jason, thank you very much for joining. We're going to do a bit of a Q&A. If there's any questions that come through, I'll get them answered. But I appreciate taking some of your time today, and we'll be speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, Tim. Chat soon.
Thanks, Jason. Bye. All right, well, that is going to cover it for today's stream. Hopefully that's been really useful in terms of getting to understand the Signage Live platform in its entirety and how it works with resellers such as Kaufman in terms of delivering the entire experience. If you find that useful, then feel free to leave a comment, subscribe. We'll be doing this once every Thursday, as per usual, Thursday 3 p.m. BST, and then they'll be uploaded and stored for you to go back and rewatch in playlists later on. If you do have any further questions, I'm going to put this onto a Q&A slide for a little while, and if there is anything else you want to ask, feel free to do that in the chat, and we'll make sure we get that answered. Otherwise, if you're watching this video afterwards, feel free to reach out to us directly, signagelive.com. You can reach out to us. You can also reach out to Kaufman Media in the description that Jason had just mentioned a second ago. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to go on to the Q&A section here, and we'll see what other questions come up. Thanks very much.